Hello, everyone. This is the 239th episode of Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles on the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I welcome back Irish freelance writer, historian, and broadcaster, Mr. John O'Carroll, once again on the podcast. As we continue our interview series with Mr. O'Carroll, as we discuss the matches of the Republic of Ireland national team during the 91-92 season. Welcome back, John.
Thank you very much, Shahan. Always a pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you. So, last time we left off at the end of a 1990-91 season. Can you take us back to the fall of 1991 and the state of the Republic of Ireland national team under Englishman Jackie Charlton, who by now had been in charge for 5 full years since 1986?
By this stage, Ireland were a major force in international soccer. Unfortunately, whether we were going to qualify for the Euro 92 finals in Sweden was an open question because we had started the campaign the previous autumn very well, but in May of 1991, we had dropped a valuable home point in a scoreless tie with Poland. And of course, England were our main rivals in the group. So that meant that England had got ahead of us in the group. So with two games remaining in the Euro 92 qualification campaign, we were a point behind England. And basically, what that meant was that we were going to have to go to Poland in the fall and also go to Turkey, win both of those games, and hope that England dropped a point in their remaining two games as well.
As you mentioned, the Republic of Ireland were in a group with Poland, Turkey, and yet again with England. And that drop point at home against Poland would be fatal, as we discussed in our last conversation.
As indeed Shahan would have been you could say, the failure to take the opportunities to beat England at Wembley the previous March.
Oh yes, that too. Yeah, yeah. They were certainly there for the taking
Yeah.
in that
Mm.
match. The season starts with a friendly against Hungary at Győr. For this match, we have the following lineup: Paddy Bonner of Celtic Glasgow in goal, Dennis Irwin of Manchester United, David O'Leary of Arsenal, captain of the team Mick McCarthy of Millwall, making his international debut, Terry Phelan of Wimbledon. And he'd be replaced by Chris Morris of Celtic Glasgow in the 82nd minute, Ray Houghton of Liverpool, Roy Keane of Nottingham Forest, John Sheridan of Sheffield Wednesday. He'd be replaced by Alan McLaughlin of Southampton in the 46th minute, Kevin Sheedy of Everton, Niall Quinn of Manchester City, David Kelly of Leicester City, and he replaced by John Aldridge, who had joined the Tranmere Rovers that season. This in the 64th minute he was replaced in. Yeah, so John Aldridge had returned to English football after a couple of seasons in Spain with Real Sociedad. And we mentioned Roy Keane. He made his international debut late in the previous season, and he was already being looked upon as one of the brightest prospects in Irish football at this point. As far as the match itself, Hungary takes the lead in the 50th minute when, after Lajos Detare's powerful long range shot was parried by Bonner and Kalman Kovacs just knocked in the rebound. But just a minute later, the Irish tied the match. Kevin Sheedy's cross from the right side was headed in by David Kelly. And in the 70th minute, Ireland would score the winner. Mick McCarthy's long throw in from the right side was headed in by Quinn. The Hungarian goalkeeper Zsolt Petri parried, and Sheedy struck the ball that hit the underside of the crossbar into the net. And Ireland won this first friendly of the season 2-1. And we should mention in that match, we got a glimpse of Mick McCarthy's long throw in, and we would witness its effectiveness more this season. Was it an extra weapon for Ireland at this point?
Absolutely, it was. Now, I mean, McCarthy had been renowned for his long throw-ins, even going back to Euro '88. You may recall in a group game against the Soviet Union, he performed a particularly long throw-in, and that culminated in Ronnie Whelan scoring a spectacular
Yes.
goal, you remember. So, yeah, I mean, they will become an important weapon, as you say. Now, for some reason, this game was not televised in any form in Ireland. There wasn't even highlights of the game shown, so we're only entirely going on newspaper reports of the game. But by all accounts, anyway, it was a good, solid all-round performance. I think it may have been Kevin Sheehy's last international goal for the Republic as well, although I'm not too sure about that
No,
because
that
I
was
know.
against Latvia for the World Cup qualifiers.
Oh, I see. Yes, I see. Yeah, because I know Kevin was coming to the end of his international career
Yeah.
round about this
Or
time.
you know what?
But
I'm sorry, even I think I might be wrong about this, but I think it may have been friendly against, was it against Wales in 93? The one at Tolka
Oh,
Park.
you're quite right, Shahan. Yeah, you're quite right. I
Yeah, that
recall
must
that
be,
now. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it was played. That friendly was played in Tolka Park in Dublin, actually,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
February of '93. Yeah, but going back to this Hungary game anyway, yeah, it was a good, by all accounts, a good solid all-round performance, and playing away from home as well. It set us up nicely, and it gave us a taste of what was to come both in Poland and in Turkey, which were going to be two difficult away games. Now, I should point out as well that the previous month in August, the Republic of Ireland had something of an unofficial run out in that on the 11th of August that year, they played Manchester United at Old Trafford in Matt Busby's testimonial. And even though it was obviously a non-cap game, a testimonial game, it was to all intents and purposes a full strength Irish team that was fielded. So you could say that Ireland had had a run out the previous month. But yeah, I mean, Hungary, even though they were in decline at this stage, I mean, it was still noteworthy for teams like Ireland to go to Hungary and come away with a win. So as I said, good all-round performance by all accounts, and it set us up nicely for the upcoming away games in Poland and in Turkey.
The key qualifier against Poland was on October 16th at Poznan. Now, for this match that Ireland had to win. And on the same day, we should mention England defeated Turkey 1-0 at Wembley. For this match, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Irvin, O'Leary, Kevin Moran of Blackburn Rovers, captain of the team, Steve Staunton of Liverpool. He'd be replaced by Terry Phelan in the 56th minute. Chris Morris, Roy Keane, Paul McGrath of Aston Villa, Andy Townsend of Chelsea, Kevin Sheedy, Tony Cascarino of Celtic Glasgow. So Ireland operated in a 4-5-1 formation with Chris Morris, who normally was a defender, playing as the extra midfielder. Ireland would take the lead in the 12th minute when Sheedy's cross on the left side was headed in by McGrath. Early in the second half, in the 54th minute, Poland tied the match when McGrath's clearance was struck in by Piotr Zhuchowski. Ireland would take the lead 6 minutes later in the 60th minute when Bonner's long punt was headed by Cascarino into the path of Townsend, who shot from the edge of the box. 9 minutes later, in the 69th minute, it looked like the match was over and Ireland were going to win when they scored a third goal. When Irvin's corner kick from the left side was headed by Keane inside the box and Cascarino shot from close range. So at this point, as far as the points tally, it was even with England. I don't remember in terms of goal difference who would have been ahead, but I imagine Ireland, right? Because they
Yeah,
defeated
Ireland would have
Turkey
been ahead.
5-0 and 3-1
Yeah.
here. But just a few minutes later, in the 74th minute, Poland pulled a goal back. When Kozeki's shot from outside of the box, it was touched by Bonner, but not held onto, and Jan Furtok tapped in the loose ball. And 5 minutes before the end, Poland tied the match when Zhuchowski's long cross from the right side was headed in by Jan Urban. The match ended as a 3-3 tie, And definitely it felt like another match that got away. In a way, maybe it's easy to say this now, but was this the match, the beginning, where you're seeing Packie Bonner's vulnerability that would be in display against the Dutch in the 1994 World Cup?
Yeah, actually, Shahan, that's a very good observation. Yeah, it was something I was actually going to bring up because just for that last Polish equaliser that made it 3-3, I mean, there was a calamitous breakdown in communications between Packy and Kevin Moran, which resulted in Fortok hitting the ball virtually into an unguarded net because Packy Bonner came out to the edge of his penalty area coming to collect the ball. Moran was going for it, and they both got their communication mixed up. So it ended up in an easy enough goal. And then the Polish goal prior to that brought them back into the game at 3-2. David O'Leary had the ball in possession. He was near the corner flag and he sort of lost possession, which was, I suppose, a black mark against him, even though he was a ball playing centre half. I suppose maybe his ball playing skills maybe came work to his detriment on this occasion. He lost possession, and from that, Poland walked the ball into the box and got their second goal from that. But several things to take out of this game. I think it was the first time we really saw Jack playing a 4-5-1. And this was to become more prevalent, maybe certainly by in the run up to USA 94. Even, I mean, to begin the game, even though it worked quite well on this occasion, like when you're chasing a game that you have to win, I mean, you don't usually set up with a 4-5-1. You try and play two strikers, to try to chase the win and get the goals. But on this occasion, it worked out well. Now, in later years, and there was a reason actually why Jack switched to 4-5-1 in later years, and that was to accommodate, you could say, the three central midfielders he had, namely Roy Keane, Andy Townsend, and John Sheridan. And by playing 4-5-1, he could play all three players simultaneously. So, okay, John Sheridan didn't appear in this particular game in 91, but yeah, I mean, it was the birth of Jack Charlton using the 4-5-1, which he would deploy much more in the years to come. But yeah, I mean, great performance. I mean, it was quite an entertaining game. For some reason, the entirety of this game is not available on YouTube. What's on YouTube consists of brief highlights and the entirety of the first half, but no footage of the entirety of the second half, unfortunately. But it was noteworthy, I mean, in that for the first time in a long time, you could say we were scoring goals away from home against a team of some repute. And that was a pleasing aspect as well. But then on the flip side of that, I mean, we were conceding goals. And as you rightly alluded to earlier, I mean, this could have been maybe, even though it didn't become evident for another couple of years, this maybe was the first maybe sign that Packy Bonner's powers as a goalkeeper were beginning to wane a little bit. Because in the next game against Turkey, you could say he was partly culpable for Turkey scoring as well. So that was certainly something that became more evident as the years went on. But we have to bear in mind as well that Jack, as we all know, could be particularly loyal to certain players. And I think Packy would have been one of those players that Jack was particularly loyal to. Because if I can just maybe quickly fast forward for a moment or so, because I think this will illustrate the point I'm trying to make. After Ireland qualified for USA 94, in December of 1993, Jack Charlton appeared on a television programme on RTE, which is the Irish television station, with a presenter called Bill O'Herlihy, who was a well-known sports presenter. He was very much like an Irish Des Lynam. For those that would have been familiar with Des Lynam in the UK, a very affable presenter and, generally considered by everybody that came across him to be a very nice man and a nice presenter. But when Bill, anyway, was asked after the interview, how did the programme go? He said that Jack, he said, was and I'll use the word bollock. Because at one stage in the interview, again, coming back to Packy Bonner, Packy's performances were, I won't say they were becoming a cause of concern, but people were starting to question, maybe was he past his peak at this stage, or maybe, I don't know, maybe was he beginning to kind of maybe lose his powers of judgment a little bit? So Bill anyway put this question to Jack, that in the run-up to USA 94, would it be maybe judicious to maybe start looking maybe at, other goalkeepers in the warm-up games, and maybe, with a view to maybe, who knows, maybe making somebody like Alan Kelly or someone like that maybe a first choice for USA 94. And when Bill, anyway, put that question to Jack, Jack abruptly threatened to pull the plug on the interview there and then. So the interview, anyway, proceeded, but I think that question about the goalkeepers was obviously excluded from the final edit. So that will tell you as well. And again, it was a tendency that Jack had, you see. He could be quite touchy, particularly in one-to-one interviews. But yes, say in press conferences and in a group setting, he was well able to put his point across, and he could explain almost chapter and verse. But yeah, so I mean, going back again to this Poland game, I mean, as I said, David O'Leary lost possession, which led to the second Polish goal. But again, there, even though Jack had exiled David for 2.5 years prior to this, and Jack really preferred Mick McCarthy over David O'Leary, in one way to his credit, though, he was slow to criticise David O'Leary on this occasion. So, as I said, it was 3-3. Now, whether it proved fatal to our chances or not is debatable, because even though we had dropped another point, this point actually kept Poland in contention as well. And that meant that Poland would have had something to play for going to their final game against England, which was also in Poznan. And I mean, had we beaten Poland in that game, Poland would have been eliminated. So whether Poland would have been up for the game against England or not, as a result, is open to conjecture. But the way it was at that stage was, later that night, England beat Turkey. They beat him just 1-0 actually at Wembley with a goal from Alan Smith. And indeed, I think Turkey, I think a guy called Junal, he struck the crossbar in the second half. So England was somewhat fortunate to come away with a 1-0 win. But what all that meant was that going into the final series of games, it was 2 points for a win. England were on 8 points, and ourselves and Poland both were on 6. Now, if England had lost to Poland, we would have been in prime position to go through if we could beat Turkey, because again, we had the better goal difference. But if Poland were to beat England by 2 goals and we were not to beat Turkey, actually Poland would go to the Euros. So going into that final game, Poland was still in contention, which maybe would have been a benefit to us, seeing that they were going to have to get a result against England, and that would have possibly opened the door for us as well. So it was really hard to play for. But again, you see, we'd played 5 games at this stage in the group, and I mean, the only game we won had been the very first one against Turkey. I mean, we'd drawn 4 games out of 5, and really, even though we weren't losing games, at the same time, we weren't winning the games that mattered either, it felt. So that was really to be our Achilles heel. And that followed us to an extent into the World Cup qualification campaign for USA 94 as well. Even though we were difficult to beat, at the same time, we were finding difficulty translating draws or drawn situations into winning positions. And then the fact as well, Shahan, that for the first time in quite a while, we had conceded 3 goals, be it friendly game or competitive. I mean, now maybe on this occasion, it might have been just seen as a one-off blip, but maybe as a couple of years down the line, we were to see that this was going to become a major Achilles heel as well. Maybe it was down to the fact as well, Shahan, that maybe by this stage, as well as Packy, David O'Leary, Kevin Moran, even Mick McCarthy, even Chris Morris, they would have been all among our defensive ranks. And I mean, they were all kind of aging as well. Certainly they would have been all, say, over 30 at this stage. So maybe age was beginning to slow these players down as well. And maybe their perception and awareness wasn't as sharp as it would have been maybe a few years earlier when they were younger. I mean, there could be that factor to it as well.
In the end, on November 13th, the Irish had to face Turkey at Istanbul, while, like you said, England traveled to Poland at Poznan to determine who would win this group. And in the end, England-Poland match ended as a 1-1 tie with Gary Lineker scoring somewhat late in the match. I think it was like maybe the
Yeah,
77th minute. They earned a draw to
yeah.
qualify.
And I think just before Gary Lineker scored, I think Poland were denied what seemed to be a clear penalty. So maybe had they got that decision maybe and made the game 2-0, I think Ireland would subsequently have qualified.
But as far as this match against Turkey on November 13th, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Chris Hughton of West Ham United. This would be Houghton's final cap for the Irish. His 53rd and final cap. His first cap had been in 1979. David O'Leary, Mick McCarthy, captain of a team, Terry Phelan, John Byrne of Sunderland, Paul McGrath, Steve Staunton, Kevin Sheedy, Tony Cascarino, and John Aldridge. And we have to point out that Dennis Irwin, Kevin Moran, Ray Houghton, Andy Townsend, and Niall Quinn were unavailable for the Irish. As far as the match, Ireland took the lead in the 7th minute when, again, McCarthy's long throw in from the right side was headed by a Turkish defender, and John Byrne volleyed the loose ball. Just a few minutes later, in the 12th minute, Turkey would tie the match when Bonner fouled Orhan Çikirici in the box and Riza Kambe scored from the penalty kick. In the second half, Ireland would take the lead. In the 55th minute, Staunton's cross from the right side was headed by Byrne at the far post. Turkish goalkeeper Hayrettin Demirbaş parried the attempt, and Cascarino struck in the loose ball. A few minutes later, in the 58th minute, Sheedy's corner kick from the right side was headed across at the far post by McGrath and struck in by John Byrne for his second goal in this match and Ireland's third. Republic of Ireland had won, but to no avail.
A welcome return from the international wilderness, we must say, for John Byrne.
Right, right. Whose appearances were becoming sporadic in these last few years. His international career would end in the following year as well.
Yeah.
But there are many what ifs in this qualification campaign. Like you said, despite being unbeaten, there was a feeling that there were matches within their grasp that they should have done better in.
Yes, and I think it's fair to say as well, even looking at it objectively and putting my Irish biases aside for one moment, I think it's fair to say that the best team did not qualify from this particular group. I have to say as well, and I know I've mentioned this maybe in an earlier podcast, but very quickly have to mention England qualified under Graham Taylor, and as we all know, the following year, they performed rather dismally at Euro 92. But what a lot of people have tended to overlook, and for some reason, whether it's purposely overlooked or genuinely overlooked, I don't know, is that England were very fortunate to qualify for Euro 92.
Mm.
And then the other point about that is, if, for instance, we had qualified for Euro 92 instead of England, would Graham Taylor have remained in charge with the 94 World Cup qualifiers? It's another good
Yeah.
question. England may have qualified for the 94 World Cup, but then conversely, Shahan, had we qualified for Euro 92, would we in turn then have qualified for USA 94? There's that way of looking at it as well, because as you know, Denmark were parachuted into Euro 92 ahead of Yugoslavia. Denmark proceeded to win Euro 92, playing a style of football that was very similar to our own. So what made this kind of failure to qualify for Euro 92 from an Irish point of view hard to take was that there is to this day a genuine feeling that had we qualified for Euro 92, it's the one tournament that we could have done very, very well in, and we may not have been very far away from actually winning the tournament. But Denmark, as I said, won Euro 92. Maybe because of that, then Denmark in turn had a sluggish start to their World Cup qualification campaign in 94, a group that we were also in along with Spain. And maybe had we qualified for Euro 92 and done well, we too may have suffered a sluggish start to the qualification for USA 94. So, as I say, it's all ifs, buts, and maybes and conjecture at this stage, Shahan.
In this match against Turkey, like we mentioned, this was the end of the international career of Chris Hughton. What can you say about his career in Irish Green? Started in a different era, but ended in the height of the Jackie Charlton era.
Made his debut way back in the fall of 1979 in a friendly against the USA in Dalymount Park in Dublin. Was a good committed player to the cause, even though I don't think he would have been no disrespect to Chris, I don't think he would have been an outstanding fullback by any manner of means, but still, he was adequate. He had a long career at Tottenham Hotspur and a reasonably successful career at that. And he was always, his lack of pace at sometimes, was to come against him. He was always a loyal servant to the Irish cause and to Jack Charlton. And I can't recall him ever letting the side down, as it were. He may have had a couple of indifferent performances, but I don't recall him at any stage playing a particularly bad game, even though in a number of his internationals, he would not have lasted the entire 90 minutes. So maybe staying power was always something of an issue for him. But yeah, good servant, even though he was another player now that age was beginning to catch up with as well. So I suppose his international career, I suppose, came to a natural conclusion at the end of this particular qualification campaign.
So the new year 1992 started with a friendly on February 19th against Wales at Dublin at Royal Dublin Society. This became a tradition. The yearly match against Wales in February. You had it the previous year, this year, and the next year.
1990, 1991, 1992, and 1993. Just a quick note about the Royal Dublin Society, or the RDS as it is known. That is actually an equestrian venue in Dublin, and it has also been used in recent years, for rugby games. The Leinster rugby team have played a number of rugby games there, but at this time it was used for soccer because Shamrock Rovers, one of the leading League of Ireland clubs, they had no home ground throughout the early 1990s. So for a couple of seasons, they rented the RDS as their home venue. And that really was one of the reasons why the RDS, it was the first and only international to be played there. And again, I think footage on YouTube is quite limited, but if you do come across any footage or maybe photographs of the action in newspapers, the ground looks quite quaint for an international venue because, I mean, along the sidelines, for instance, where usually you would have perimeter advertising, there are hedgerows clearly visible. So it was really, you could say, a picturesque setting for an international soccer game. But Lansdowne Road was unavailable for that particular game, which was played in the middle of February. And of course, would have been the height of the rugby playing season. So Lansdowne Road, I think it's fair to say, would have been in poor condition. And then the RDS did not have floodlights. So I think this game was played maybe early afternoon. It was certainly played in daylight anyway, which in February in Ireland would mean early to mid-afternoon. So yes, yeah, they played Wales, and this match was to become notable, as no doubt you'll mention in that. It was the first game Ireland actually were to lose in Dublin since Jack's very first game against Wales, again against Wales, by the way,
Right.
6 years previously.
Yeah, and in fact, it was Ireland's first defeat in Dublin in 26 matches.
Not in Lansdowne Road, I hasten to add, but in Dublin
In
nonetheless.
Dublin, yeah. For this match, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Chris Morris, David O'Leary. Making his international debut, Liam Daish of Cambridge United, Dennis Irvin, John Byrne, Roy Keane, Terry Phelan. He'd be replaced by John Aldridge in the 55th minute. Andy Townsend, captaining Ireland, I think for the first time, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I think Mick McCarthy was kind of gradually being, I suppose maybe his international career was almost over at this stage. So maybe
Right.
Jack, it was time to blood a new captain, and he saw Andy Townsend as being the person best provided for that.
And he'd be replaced by Alan McLaughlin in the 46th minute. Kevin Sheedy. Tony Cascarino had at that point joined Chelsea. I think he was swapped with Tommy Boyd, who joined Celtic, the
Yeah.
Scottish player Tommy Boyd. So Tony Cascarino's at Chelsea at this point, and he'd be replaced by Niall Quinn of Manchester City in the 68th minute. As far as the match itself, like you mentioned, Wales would win 1-0. In the 72nd minute, Neville Southall sent a long punt that reached Mark Pembridge, who scored Wales's winner, the first home defeat in 6 years.
It was a bit of a surprise, even though it was a friendly, it was still a bit of a surprise that we lost that game. Although we should point out that, Wales were a decent team at this stage as well. I mean, they had narrowly failed to qualify for Euro 92 also. They were in a group with Germany, and ran Germany very close as regards qualifying for Euro 92. So, I mean, Wales were sort of like us. They were sort of there or thereabouts at this stage when it came to qualifying for tournaments. And they played a very similar system to us as well, which maybe could have been telling in one way, in that, you see, Ireland were okay at this time, maybe imposing their game upon other teams. But when other teams maybe played a fairly similar style to us, we tended to struggle. I mean, we saw it, for instance, in the 1990 World Cup against Egypt, for instance. Egypt basically played the same tactics as we did, so they managed to nullify us as well. And I mean, the games against England at this stage, between ourselves and England, seem to be all the time petering out into draws. Again, in that both teams were cancelling each other out, because, again, both teams would have been playing the same style of soccer. So there was that aspect to look at as well, that maybe when we were coming up against teams that were playing fairly similar to us, we were struggling to break them down. And we did not seem to have the answers at that time yet as to break down these teams. But yes, I mean, I suppose you mentioned to us the international debut for Liam Daish. He had something of a fleeting international career, but I suppose the only thing you could take from this, Shahan, is that it was a run out. And I suppose it gave Jack a chance to maybe if he wished to, experiment a little. But I have to say as well that, and again, this became evident, even in friendly matches throughout Jack's time, he did not tend to overly experiment. If he did,
Right.
say, bring in newcomers or fringe players, he only tended to bring in maybe one or two. He didn't say, even for a friendly game, he didn't tend to make wholesale changes. He really kept the core of the established team for all these games. And maybe that too was a criticism that was kind of maybe put at him, particularly in later years as well, in that maybe he didn't blood enough players in friendly games. But be that as it may, anyway, this game was a win for Wales. It wasn't televised in Ireland. I think there may have been highlights on that night or something. But by all accounts, anyway, it was a dour game, and a game that I suppose really, for the most part, would be sort of quickly forgotten, in that it was a game of little enough incident. But as I said, a win for Wales, and a good win for Wales at that.
The next friendly was on March 25th at Dublin at Lansdowne Road against Switzerland, managed by Roy Hodgson, who would go on and qualify for the 1994 World Cup. Now, for this match, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Morris, McGrath, Captain Ireland, David O'Leary, he'd be replaced by Liam Daish in the 46th minute, Terry Phelan, making his international debut, Eddie McGoldrick of Crystal Palace. He'd be replaced by Liam O'Brien of Newcastle United in the 46th minute, Roy Keane, Ronnie Whelan of Liverpool, Steve Staunton at Aston Villa. He'd be replaced by Kevin Sheedy, who had joined Newcastle United in the 54th minute. Making his international debut, Tommy Coyne of Celtic Glasgow. He'd be replaced by John Aldridge in the 80th minute and Tony Cascarino. Tommy Coyne would also score in his international debut. But in this match, Switzerland would take the lead when, in the 25th minute, Alan Suter's free kick was deflected by Ronnie Whelan's head into his own net. Just 2 minutes later, Ireland tied the match when, from just inside the Irish half, Staunton sent a long through ball forward and Tommy Coyne advanced to score and tie the match. Ireland would score the winner in the 88th minute when Harald Gamperl fouled Liam O'Brien in the box and John Aldridge scored from the penalty kick, and Ireland won 2-1.
Again, a game wasn't televised in Ireland, and actually, what was becoming noticeable as well was that maybe a lot of the supporters maybe were kind of maybe following the Republic was an expensive venture at this stage, in that by this stage, the home friendly internationals were no longer guaranteed sellouts. In fact, they weren't sellouts at all. And compare that to a couple of years previously, where even a home friendly was a guaranteed sellout. But by this stage anyway, friendlies weren't guaranteed sellouts. And as a result, these games would not have been televised live. There would have been highlights that evening, but that would have been it. But again, don't recall too much from this particular game, except that again it was a good victory, I suppose, against an up and coming Switzerland team. Switzerland had shown signs of promise in the qualification for Euro 92, although they did not qualify for that. And as we were to see, Switzerland were to emerge in the qualification for Euro 94 when they qualified from a group that included both Italy and Portugal. So they were certainly a team on the up, managed by Roy Hodgson, of course. And yeah, I mean, we were, I suppose, sort of by this stage preparing for the upcoming World Cup qualifiers as well, in that we were going to be playing Spain, we were going to be playing Denmark, going to be playing Northern Ireland and Latvia and Lithuania as well. So again, an opportunity to blood players, maybe make a few tweaks to the system, and once again come away with the win.
The next friendly was again at Dublin at Lansdowne Road on April 29th against the United States, the 1994 World Cup hosts. Now, for this match, we have the following lineup. Jerry Payton started in goal from Everton, Chris Morris, McGrath, O'Leary. He'd be replaced by international debutant Brian Carey of Manchester United in the 72nd minute. So then you have Dennis Irvin, and he'd be replaced by international debutant Mike Milligan of Oldham Athletic in the 62nd minute. And for him, this would be his one and only cap for Ireland. And Eddie McGoldrick, Alan McLaughlin, who had joined Portsmouth at this point, Townsend, Steve Staunton, Tommy Coyne. He'd be replaced by John Aldridge in the 82nd minute, Niall Quinn, and he'd be replaced by Tony Cascarino in the 72nd minute. And this match, Ireland would win 4-1. Ireland took the lead in the 46th minute when Payton's long punt was headed to the left by Quinn and Townsend shot from just outside of the box. In the 52nd minute, Dennis Irvin scored from a free kick. In the 70th, McGoldrick's cross from the right side was headed across by Milligan to the left, and Niall Quinn struck at the far post. In the 87th minute, Tony Cascarino received the ball on the left and then went on a solo run, got into the box and shot, and Ireland were 4-0 ahead. But the United States pulled the goal back just before the end in the 89th minute when Eric Wynalda received the ball just inside the Irish half and on the right and went on a solo run and shot from a narrow angle once inside the box. And the match ended with a 4-1 win for the Irish.
Yes, yes. And a rare solo goal as well from Tony Cascarino. You know, he
Yeah.
was always known for his strength in the air, but not so much his skill on the ground. So this was something of a rarity to see him, perform a dribble and finish the move with a goal.
Yeah, you mentioned that Charlton didn't really make too many experimentations, but in these few matches, at least there's like one or two players who are tried in these
Yeah.
matches. So was he clearly eyeing the World Cup in 2 years?
Yeah, I would safely say that, Shahan. And I mean, maybe this is why what he was using these friendlies for, to maybe blood in each game, maybe give runs to one or two players, see how they would manage, maybe give them a second game after that, and then maybe make a judgment on them. Because I mean, Liam Daesh, for instance, as I mentioned, he didn't have a particularly long international career. Mike Milligan, as you mentioned, this was his one and only cap. So I suppose Jack was basically trying to see could these players, do a job for him going forward. And I mean, of course, it goes without saying as well, it was putting enormous pressure on these international debutants and fringe players in that even though these games were only friendlies, these players still had to perform in them. Otherwise, they would not be retained. So, I mean, these players too were under pressure to perform in these games if they wanted to, I suppose, maybe enjoy something of established international careers. So there was that side to it as well. But yeah, again, I think there was highlights shown that night on television. Don't remember too much about him, but In one way, it was strange that we played the USA. Now, maybe this game had been arranged for some time, or else it was maybe hastily arranged. I don't know. And why it was strange that we were playing the USA in this game was we were playing them again the following month
Right.
in the 1982 US Cup. So, to play the same opposition maybe twice in 4 or 5 weeks would be, in friendly matches, would be a bit strange in itself. But either or, anyway, yeah, I mean, it was a good win again. And of course, that was a dry run then for our next game, which was to be our opening World Cup qualifier against Albania.
You have to remember this was an expanded World Cup group with so many teams. So that's why maybe perhaps some of the qualifiers were played towards the end of that season and not traditional as it would have been in the next season.
The flip side of that, Shahan, then was that teams that had qualified for Euro 92, because of the expanded qualification system, particularly Denmark, for instance. I mean, when the following season came around, then they had something of a backlog of international matches to clear.
And we have to remember that the breakup of the Soviet Union and, of course, Yugoslavia with the civil war had expanded the number of participants. These 1994 World Cup qualifiers were the first ones where you have more teams in the qualifying pool in Europe. So this match, this World Cup qualifier, was to take place on May 26th at Dublin at Lansdowne Road. Now, we should specify that at this point, Albania were essentially Europe's poorest nation at this point.
Yeah, right.
And there are a lot of political turmoil back at home. They arrived 2 days before the match with no kit and claiming they were expecting £50,000 gift from the Irish Federation. In fact, Albania came with only 9 senior players and had to include a number of under 21 players, some of whom, like 3 of whom, had actually played the night before. And in the end, Adidas provided kits for the Albanian squad from a local department store, Pennies. Yeah.
Yes, which would be something of well, we know that Penny's would be something of a bargain store here in Ireland. So, but despite all that, we have to mention as well that Albania did, they did put up quite a spirited performance, and they were not disgraced by any means in this game.
For this match, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Irvin, McGrath captaining the team, O'Leary, Staunton, Houghton, Townsend, Roy Keane, Kevin Sheedy. He'd replaced by Mick McCarthy in the 51st minute, Niall Quinn, John Aldridge. He'd be replaced by Tom Coyne in the 83rd minute. As far as the match, Ireland would have to wait an hour to break the deadlock. In the 60th minute, from the middle on the right, Roy Keane crossed into the box and John Aldridge headed in the first goal. In the 80th minute, Mick McCarthy's again long throw in from the right side was headed in by McGrath, and Ireland won 2-0. Going into the US Cup, I would say at this point they had ended the season on a satisfactory note.
Yes, that's right. Now, I mean, it was an inauspicious start to the World Cup qualification campaign. Something of an underwhelming performance, and it was fortunate as well that the goals scored did not come back to haunt us at the end, because if it had, this was a game that maybe, we should have put up more goals in. But as I say, it was a spirited performance by the Albanians. And of course, what may have contributed to Ireland's lacklustre performance too was that Andy Townsend, who featured in this game, he was really a spent force because he had played 3 games, 3 friendly games the previous week with Chelsea. They were playing some, I think, a series of exhibition games overseas somewhere. And Andy Townsend featured in all these games, and he featured again in this World Cup qualifier. Now, I mean, why Jack didn't request maybe Chelsea to rest Andy Townsend for these friendly games, I don't know. Because I think by this stage, Jack had come to the realization that maybe it was best to, maintain friendly relations with club managers in order maybe, to guarantee or facilitate the release of players for key internationals going forward. So maybe there was a bit of that to it. But yeah, I mean, a satisfactory result and a satisfactory win, even though it was somewhat underwhelming. It gave us a solid enough start to this World Cup qualification campaign. Now, I mean, it meant that there was going to be no room for slip ups against the weaker nations in qualification because with Spain, Denmark, and a team that could be a potential banana skin at this time as well, Northern Ireland, particularly if they had got off to a good start in qualification campaigns. They tended to be difficult to break down as well. So, I mean, there was little room for error against the so-called weaker teams. So, yeah, it was really much a case, I suppose, of at the end of the season, getting a victory and then proceeding to the 92 US Cup, which I suppose was seen as a dry run for, USA 94, should we qualify for that. It would give the Irish, experience of playing adjusting to the climate and maybe playing in venues that they might feature in 94 itself.
In hindsight, perhaps the season should have ended with Ireland having achieved its main objectives in the win over
Possibly.
Albania. But obviously, for commercial reasons and
Yeah.
preparatory reasons, with the 1994 World Cup in mind, Ireland had to participate in this US Cup along with the United States, Italy, and Portugal. Was there any enthusiasm to participate from the squad after a long season?
Well, I'm not quite sure because I suppose I don't think this tour was taken very seriously anyway. Now, I'm not saying for one second that this tour turned out to be, a holiday jaunt or anything like that, but I think maybe, a lot of players were tired at the end of a long, hard season. So maybe the motivation for this tournament, which was really a friendly tournament, maybe the motivation maybe, wasn't as great as it would be, say, if it had been a serious tournament. Because I know, for instance, there's anecdotal stories which suggest that a number of Irish players maybe regarded this US tour as something of an end of season jaunt, in that, they were sort of getting in rest and relaxation and maybe some drinks in as well while on tour. So maybe that contributed as well, maybe to some lackluster performances on this trip. But as you say, it was, in all likelihood, it was done for commercial reasons. There was a large Irish diaspora in the United States. It was given the Irish diaspora there a chance to see the Republic of Ireland team on their shores. And as well as that, then obviously, it would have been good acclimatization should Ireland qualify for USA 94 because the feeling was that we did not know much about Denmark at this stage. Denmark were to come out of nowhere and win Euro 92. So it was felt at this point in time that we were maybe ourselves and Spain were going to be the favourites to qualify, maybe just ahead of Denmark. So it was sort of taken that all things being equal, if we kind of maintained our form, we would qualify for USA 94. So maybe this tour was obviously seen as a dry run for that.
And we should remember Ireland in the previous year, the previous summer in 91, they also traveled to the United States. That match ended as a 1-1 tie. So
Yeah,
within
and
a
I
year,
think
there'll be three matches.
yeah, and I think Shahan actually that 91 game against the US. I think at that stage it was one of the biggest crowds ever to attend a US international soccer game. It was over 50,000.
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah. That was a
Yeah.
large crowd. So this US Cup started on May 30th. So yeah, just a month after the previous matchup. This time the United States hosted Republic of Ireland. The match was at Washington D.C. at RFK Stadium. Now, for this match, the United States included some of their players who were playing for European clubs but who were absent in the previous match. This included the likes of Thomas Dooley playing at Kaiserslautern, Roy Wegerle playing at Blackburn Rovers, also played in this match, as well as Ernie Stewart, who played at Willem II in the Netherlands. As far as Ireland, we have the following lineup: Jerry Payton in goal, Chris Morris, he'd be replaced by Dennis Irvin in the 78th minute, Mick McCarthy, captain of the team, Kevin Moran, Terry Phelan, Ray Houghton, Roy Keane. He'd be replaced by Alan McLaughlin in the 80th minute, Paul McGrath, Andy Townsend, Steve Staunton. He'd be replaced by Tommy Coyne in the 60th minute, and Niall Quinn. And we should mention this match was played under heavy rain. Ireland played in a 4-5-1 formation, but in the hour mark, they reverted to a 4-4-2 when Tommy Coyne came on. As far as the match, Ireland took the lead in the 53rd minute when Steve Staunton's corner kick from the left side was headed in by McCarthy. But just a minute later, the United States tied the match. A free kick taken from the left side was headed across by Dooley to the right side. And from the right hand side, John Doyle crossed it for Marcelo Balboa and he tied the match. In the 70th minute, Fernando Clavijo crossed from the left side for Tab Ramos, who volleyed it home from outside of the box. And in the 87th minute, the United States scored a third goal. From the middle, just outside of the box, Roy Wegerle backheeled the pass to Dooley, who chipped over Payton to set up John Harkes on the right side, who knocked it in. And remember, John Harkes is also a player for Sheffield Wednesday at this point.
Yeah.
United States won 3-1. The Irish would have been fatigued. Tom Dooley and Roy Wegerle, they were naturalized players for the United States who made their debuts in this match.
Is it true as well, Shahan? Now, I've heard this story anecdotally over the years that even though Thomas Dooley, he played for the USA, he couldn't speak a word of English.
I don't know that
Yeah.
exactly.
I've heard anecdotally. Now, whether it's true or not, I don't
I
know.
think I have heard him speak, but obviously with an accent. But yeah,
Yeah.
that I don't know if he did not speak English. That I can't confirm.
Yeah. And then, of course, he was a player too, for the record, that would have had Irish ancestry, maybe through a grandparent. So, it does
I mean,
well.
yeah, and of course, he was the son of an American GI
Yeah,
in Germany.
yeah,
That's
and
how
a
he was
German mother.
qualified
Yeah,
to be a naturalized citizen. But obviously,
yeah,
he had played all his career in the Bundesliga.
yeah. And was quite a good player as well, particularly for Bayer Leverkusen back around
Right.
then.
Disappointing match for Ireland. Clearly, they were fatigued. And let's remember, this is only 4 days after the match against Albania. So you have to
Yeah,
take into account the transatlantic
yeah,
flight and maybe 1 or 2
yeah,
days of maybe a training. Who knows?
yeah,
So not enough
yeah,
time to acclimatize and
yeah, yeah.
prepare.
Yeah. So I think that's another reason as well, Shahan, why this was kind of seen maybe he wasn't taken over seriously because had he been taken seriously, I doubt very much if the game against Albania would have been played so close to, departure for this tour.
Yeah, well, it would only get worse. The next match was on June 4th against Italy at Boston, Massachusetts, at Foxborough Stadium. This is an Italy containing the likes of Paolo Maldini, Franco Baresi, Pierluigi Casiraghi, Vialli, Mancini, Signori. Yeah, Baggio was missing for this match, but he was all part of the Italy squad as well. So for this match, the Irish wearing an old green kit, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Dennis Irvin. He replaced by, well, Paddy Bonner would be sent off after a foul on Giuseppe Signori in the
Mm,
64th minute. So that necessitated Dennis Irvin to be replaced by Jerry Payton in the 64th
mm,
minute, whose first act was to concede a penalty, a kick. But
mm,
more about that later. We have Mick McCarthy. He'd be replaced by Alan McLaughlin in the 46th minute. O'Leary, Staunton, McGoldrick. He'd replaced by Terry Phelan in the 80th minute. McGrath, Townsend, Houghton, Quinn. He'd replaced by Coyne in the 72nd minute. Aldridge, he'd replaced by David Kelly in the 78th minute. Also in the second half, Paul McGrath was the captain after McCarthy was taken off. Italy would take the lead in the 17th minute when Giuseppe Signori scored from an indirect free kick. But the talking point of this match occurred in the 64th minute when Mancini sent Signori clear. Bonner fouled him in the box and he was sent off as the last man. Payton came on, but Alessandro Costa Curta scored from the penalty kick and Italy won 2-0. So two matches, two losses for the Irish.
That penalty incident that you alluded to there, again, maybe it was a result of bad communication between Pat Bonner and, the central defence as well. He was left exposed once again. In the earlier years, this wasn't an issue at all, but particularly this season, I mean, there was a number of instances defenders getting calls mixed up and breakdown in communications, which led to some costly goals being conceded.
There was one match left. Neither them nor Portugal were particularly impressive in this US Cup. For Portugal, you have some big names like Luis Figo, Joao Vieira Pinto. Fernando Couto was also in the Portuguese
And
squad.
Carlos Queiroz, I think, was the manager at this stage.
Like,
Portugal were a decent enough side as well at this time.
it was the
They
beginnings
were
of the
really,
golden
yeah,
generation.
they were an
Yeah.
up and coming team. Even though I thought maybe the USA 94 qualification came just a bit too soon for them, but they were certainly being up and coming team, as indeed the Republic were to find out their cost a few years down the road when it came to qualifying for Euro 96.
Oh, yes, yes, of course. So for this match, Ireland wearing all white. We have the following lineup. This match was on June 7th, again at Boston, Massachusetts, at Foxborough. We have the following lineup. Peyton, this would be his final cap for Ireland, his 33rd and final cap. His first cap was as far back as 1977.
And very much had an unsung hero, even though, I mean, he had his international career stretched back to 1977. He was really, to all intents and purposes, a reserve goalkeeper for virtually all of his international careers, but was always there when called on and, never let the side down, particularly, say, in a World Cup qualifier back in the fall of 1988 against Northern Ireland in Belfast when he made one brilliant save, which was instrumental to us coming away from that game with a 0-0 draw.
Then you have Chris Morris, Mick McCarthy, captain of the team. This was also his final cap for Mick McCarthy, his 57th and final cap. His first cap had been in 1984. David O'Leary, Staunton, Houghton, McGrath, McLaughlin, Terry Phelan. He'd replaced by McGoldrick in the 90th minute. Niall Quinn, he replaced by Aldridge in the 87th minute. David Kelly, he replaced by Coyne in the 59th minute. The Irish would win this match 2-0. Steve Staunton in the 39th minute scored directly from a corner, a trick he would repeat the following season against Northern Ireland. And in the 90th minute, Steve Staunton, he found Ray Houghton, whose cross was headed in by Tom Coyne. Ireland ended the season with a win, but overall, they were tired for this tour. In retrospect, were there any lessons learned from this tournament or any objective analysis was lost as the team was clearly fatigued?
Yes, yeah, that's a fair summation. And of course, what happened as well during this tour, and it actually could have been in the run up or the aftermath of this Portugal game, I'm not too sure, was the first inkling of a difference of opinion between Mick McCarthy and Roy Keane. Because sometime now, as I say, whether it was in the run up to this Portugal game or in the aftermath of the Portugal game, I'm not too sure. But apparently, the players were waiting to get on the team bus after having maybe a pre or a post match drink or whatever. And I think Kevin Moore and Roy Keane were somewhat late getting on the bus. Maybe they kind of imbibed maybe a little bit too well or whatever. So basically, Jack Charlton anyway tackled or laid into Kevin Moore on the bus, setting a bad example for the younger players and so on. And while Jack Charlton was lambasting Kevin Moore, who he left out of his next two squads, by the way, as a result, Mick McCarthy in turn took Roy Keane to task. And apparently, Roy Keane wasn't very impressed by this. So maybe that could have sown the seeds as well, kind of for the,
For
I suppose,
Saipan, yeah.
yeah, well, maybe not for Saipan at that stage, but certainly, it showed that, there was going to be a clash of personalities, obviously, because Mick, even though this was his last game for Ireland, he was still being seen as Jack's enforcer. And I suppose maybe an up and coming player like Roy Keane, I suppose maybe did not particularly, like being upbraided by maybe somebody who, as a player, maybe was inferior to him.
However, the quarrel between Jackie Charlton and Kevin Moran was more critical at this point.
Well, I suppose maybe Kevin was coming to the end of his career anyway, but I suppose maybe Jack felt that maybe the older players, should be setting an example to the younger players because of that. And then, of course, maybe again, like the David O'Leary exiled some years previously, Jack had an abundance of centre halves at his disposal at this stage. So he could afford to drop somebody like Kevin Moran. But obviously, the dropping did not last for very long because by the time the following fall came around, Mick McCarthy had retired from international football, meaning we were a bit light in the centre half department. So even though Kevin Moran was dropped for one game, he was a late call up for the second squad, which turned out to be a key qualification match against Denmark in Copenhagen, which we managed to get a 0-0 draw from. So all worked out well in the end anyway. But I suppose maybe Jack as well, naturally enough, maybe felt that, he had to maintain some authority and discipline within the squad. And maybe he saw the older players maybe as people that should be setting an example, to the younger players.
To circle back to our earlier discussion about Paki Bonner, as we see in this tour as well, especially what happened against Italy, was this again, do you think, a precursor to what would happen against the Dutch in 94?
Possibly, yeah. Even though, we have to say it, we're not in any way critical of Paki Bonner, we should say, even though your listeners might take this, or viewers might take this narrative view. But really, what we're saying is that maybe by this stage, he was past his best and, he was prone to error. But then again, Jack was loyal to particular players, and Paki was one of them. And it would have taken, I suppose, a dramatic slump in form for Jack to contemplate maybe dropping Paki from that. And then, of course, maybe the fact that Jerry Payton had retired as well. Jack really had not blooded any goalkeepers. I think, off the top of my head, actually, I think from the time Jack took over in 86 up to this time, it was really just Paki and Jerry Payton that would have featured in all the matches. I know Killam O'Hanlon featured in one match in the fall of 87 against Israel, but I don't recall any other goalkeepers
Yeah.
featuring.
And I'm just going by my memory. Didn't for the 1990 World Cup, didn't he only take two goalkeepers instead of three?
That's correct. He took an
Yeah.
extra outfield player instead. Now, whether that was maybe he wanted an extra outfield player or because of the depth of goalkeeper or maybe the lack of maybe suitable goalkeepers, I don't know. But Alan Kelly, for instance, Alan Kelly really did not come on the scene maybe for another season or two. Yeah, I don't recall. Even when Alan Kelly did come on the scene, I don't recall Jack ever experimenting too much with goalkeepers. As I say, up to 1992, apart from that one appearance that Kilmore Hannon made, could have been either Paki or Jerry Payton. And of course, the fact that Jerry Payton had now retired meant that Paki would have been the number one choice going into the qualification for USA 94. Even though, as I say, maybe age was catching up with Paki and maybe maybe that was beginning to maybe affect his judgment and maybe communication and maybe mobility a bit as well. We saw it as well, Shan, even if you look at Wales, for instance. Neville Southall, a great goalkeeper in his prime, but perhaps maybe remained in goal a bit too long. And again, at the end of his career, he was prone to some costly errors as well. And even Peter Shilton for England as well. Maybe it happens all goalkeepers, maybe, that maybe, when you get maybe well past the 30 mark, maybe age catches up with you really as well.
To pick up on an earlier theme, and in fact, earlier themes of previous podcasts, in terms of experimentation, it seems like only Terry Phelan adapted that season, while the
Yeah.
others would make sporadic appearances at best over the years. And just like in our previous discussions, was it difficult to adapt to Charlton's system?
That could have been it. And also at that time, there wasn't really young players coming through. And I don't think we saw any young players coming through until maybe the spring of 1994 when three arrived on the scene
Oh, yeah, Gary
altogether.
Kelly and well,
Here. But really up to then, like we did not have really young players coming through, apart from maybe the sporadic one as you mentioned. Because even guys like Mike Milligan that Jack would have given appearances too. Kind of Mike too wasn't exactly a spring chicken at this stage. He would have been maybe late 20s as well. So he wasn't, shall we say, a young player. And even back around then as well, I can't remember the particular year now, but it would have been back around this time. The FAI even they used to give annual, international awards, for senior player of the year and young player of the year. And round about this time as well, Terry Phelan was the recipient of the Young Player of the
Oh
Year
yeah,
award,
I
even
remember
though,
this. Yeah,
even
he
though
was.
he was 26. There was just nobody else younger than him to receive the award, basically. So,
Yeah. This was also the end of the line for Mick McCarthy. What can you
yeah.
say about his career with Ireland? And was his departure anticipated, or were there other reasons?
Well, I would say his departure was sort of anticipated because, I mean, again, he was well into his 30s by this stage. Mobility, obviously. Well, maybe mobility always was an issue with him, but maybe by now it was becoming more pronounced. And maybe Mick maybe felt that, at this stage, maybe, his playing career was over and maybe it was time for him to move into management, which he did successfully in the years that followed. So, but I mean, he would have been a huge loss to Jack because he was really Jack's lieutenant, it's fair to say. Jack's enforcer on the pitch. He was the guy that, made sure that Jack's instructions were followed and followed to the hilt at that. And maybe Jack maybe saw in Mick, maybe, an embodiment of Jack himself as a player.
In closing, what was the takeaway from this 1991-92 season? It seems without the US Cup, it would have been a continuation of the improvements of the previous years.
Yeah, that would be fair to say. Okay, apart from the match against Wales, oh yeah, and then of course if you exclude the US Cup, again we were turning to be a difficult team to beat. But again, maybe in some cases, maybe winning competitive matches, was an issue for us. And maybe, had we qualified for Euro 92, I mean, who knows? I mean, it's fair to say there would have been no US Cup. And how we would have performed at Euro 92 is conjecture at this stage as well. Because even though a lot of people felt that it was our best chance of winning a tournament, I feel myself it's debatable whether we would have actually won Euro 92 or not. Because had we qualified, I mean, we would have been in with France, we would have been in with Sweden, and of course Denmark. And I mean, they would have been all tough opposition just to come out of the group. And then maybe, at the semi finals, then maybe up against the Germans or the Dutch. I mean, it would have been difficult for us. And maybe we may have ended up suffering a hangover from that into the next qualification campaign for the World Cup. So, as I say, all ifs, buts, and maybes at this stage. But I would say, yeah, a continue in an overall sense, yeah, a continuation of previous seasons where we were proven difficult to beat, but obviously, turning draws into victories in competitive games against, shall we say, reputable opposition was an issue for us. And it was something that we were going to have to address, I think, if we were to be successful in the years that followed. And then, of course, the fact that maybe not so much for the World Cup qualification campaign, but certainly after USA 94, maybe some rejigging of the team was going to be needed because, age was catching up with several of the players, even by 92. And obviously, maybe we may have been okay, we may have got away with it for the qualification for 94, but certainly after 94, new players were going to have to be blooded and introduced into the Irish setup.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this series. All our respective contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So, John, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on Irish football history.
Yeah, absolutely, Shahan. Thanks as always, and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you.